In this lecture, we will talk about the historical urban development in Latin America. This lecture will cover two historical periods of Latin America, which are the pre-Columbian period and the colonial period. Pre-Columbian civilizations are the Aboriginal American Indian cultures that evolved in Mesoamerica and the Andean region prior to Spanish exploration and conquest in the 16th century. The Mesoamerica region covers part of Mexico and Central America. It contains the blue and yellow areas in this map. The Andean region consists of Western South America. It's the orange area in this map. Geographically and culturally, Mesoamerica consists of two regions, the Mexico highland and the lowland Maya. The classic period of Mayan culture lasted from 250 to about 900 CE. At its height, Mayan civilization consisted of more than 40 cities, each with a population between 5 to 50,000. After 900 CE, the classic Mayan civilization suddenly declined. Scholars suggested a number of possible reasons, including armed conflicts, the extraction of agricultural land, war-related disruption of river and land trade routes, and deforestation and drought. During the post-classic period, a number of cities in the Yucatan Peninsula continued to flourish for several centuries after the Great Lowland cities had become depopulated. Tikal is the ceremonial center and largest city in the southern Maya lowlands. The Tikal ruins are the central attraction of Tikal National Park, which was established in the 1950s and designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979. Roughly about 100 years before the Spanish conquest, Aztec Empire was formed. Tenochtitlan was the capital of the Aztec Empire, located at the site of the modern Mexico City. The city was originally located on two small islands in Lake Texcoco. It gradually spread through the construction of artificial islands to cover more than 5 square miles. In 1519, the population of the city was estimated to be about 400,000 people, the largest residential concentration in Mesoamerican history. Andean civilization refers to a wide variety of high mountain and desert coastal cultures and kingdoms developed in western South America for several thousand years before the Spanish invasion of Peru in 1532. At the time of the Spanish conquest, the Andean region was ruled by the Incan Empire. The Inca established their capital at Cusco in the 12th century. Nowadays, Cusco is a city in Peru. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the Western Hemisphere. The famous Inca ruins of Machu Picchu, located about 50 miles northwest of Cusco. Now we move on to talk about colonialism and colonial cities in Latin America. Western colonialism is a political economic phenomenon whereby various European nations explored, conquered, settled, and exploited large areas of the world. Remember, we've talked about mercantilism in the history of European cities. This economic system has profound influence on the relationship between European countries and their colonies. The mercantile theory states that colonies exist only for the economic benefits of the mother country and are useless unless they help to achieve profit. The mother nation should draw raw materials from the colonies and use their industrial capabilities to turn the raw materials into manufactured goods. As these colonies became populated, they became new markets for the mother country to sell to. This trade should be monopolistic. Other countries cannot trade with its colonies, and colonies cannot trade with each other. By putting mercantile theories into practice, colonialism brings tremendous amount of wealth to European countries at the expense of the colonies. This is the famous Columbian exchange. It's a process of transferring plants, animals, microbes, and people across the Atlantic in both directions. The most fatal exchange between the Old and New Worlds was the transfer of European diseases to the Americas. The Native Americans had very little immunity to these diseases. It's estimated that within 100 years of Columbus landing in Hispaniola, 90% of all people who were living in the Americas died of disease. This is a demographic catastrophe. What this meant was that even though the Europeans had hoped to enslave the indigenous people and use them as a labor force in plantation and mining, very few of them survived. So the Europeans needed another labor force. They found that labor source on the west coast of Africa, where there was a long tradition of slave trading. They brought enslaved African people against their will across the Atlantic to work in the Americas. You will learn more about the slave trade in the video assignment linked to this lecture. After Columbus discovered the America, there had been conflicts between Spain and Portugal over their colonial territories in the New World. To solve these conflicts, Spain and Portugal negotiated the Treaty of Tordesillas to divide the world between them. East of the line is Portugal's areas of the world, and west of the line would be Spain's. Note that there are part of the South America fell on Portugal's side of the line, that is today's Brazil. It became a Portuguese colony, and even today speaks Portuguese. Of course, this treaty didn't ask anybody else's permission to divide the world between Spain and Portugal. They didn't ask the native people of the Americas. They didn't ask anybody else in Europe. So the other European countries rejected the terms of the treaty and pursued their own agenda regarding the colonization of Americas. But still, Spain and Portugal were the major colonizers of Latin America. During the first years of Spanish occupation, the islands of the Caribbean were the major arena of development. Santo Domingo was founded in the southeastern coast of Hispaniola in 1496, together with many other short-lived secondary cities on the island. These cities were built for gold mining with the enslaved Indians, but the mines soon began to run out, and the native population declined dramatically, mostly because of European diseases, overwork, and poor treatment. In the second decade of the 16th century, the Spanish pushed on to the other large Caribbean islands and repeated the cycle of digging out all mineral deposits and losing Indian population. Around the same time, expeditions to the mainland began to seek for new assets and to try to replace the lost population on the islands. The Spaniards pushed toward the mainland in two streams, one from Cuba to central Mexico and the other one from Hispaniola to Peru. By conquering the Aztec and Inca Empire, the Spaniards enslaved their large indigenous population and captured rich deposits of silver and gold. After the military conquest, thousands of Spanish immigrants poured into Mexico and Peru, making these two regions the central areas of Spanish America. The Spaniards built mining and agricultural centers and rebuilt indigenous centers to serve as new imperial cities. This photo shows how the Spaniards built Mediterranean-style structure on top of Inca stone wall in Cusco. At the beginning stage of the colonization, very few Spanish women came to the colonies because it was dangerous. Spanish men had relationships with both Native women and African women, and Native Americans and Africans had relationships. So there was an unprecedented mixing of peoples and cultures in the New World. To manage this incredibly diverse society, the Spanish developed a caste system that very carefully ranked individuals by how much Spanish blood they had, so that people with pure Spanish blood were at the top of the hierarchy. People who had both Native American heritage and European heritage were called mestizo at the time. People with European heritage and African heritage were called mulatto at the time. As you move up and down this scale, you had more legal rights than the groups below you. This is what is known as the casta painting, which were very carefully categorized where every person fell on this hierarchy of race. The Spanish colonial city adopts a right-angled grid pattern with a central plaza at the city center. The imposed urban form served as an effective instrument of social control. Important institutions such as the Roman Catholic Cathedral, the Town Hall, the Governor's Palace, and the commercial centers are close to the central plaza. Spanish residents clustered around the urban core, often in houses built with defensive walls and enclosed inner courtyards. Indians and undesirable land uses were banished to the urban periphery. The Portuguese came upon the Brazilian coast in 1500s. In early periods, Brazil was an occasional trading post for Portugal's route to India. About 1530, the Portuguese began to feel pressures to intensify their involvement with Brazil, mostly because of the success of Spanish America. In 1548, the Portuguese decided to set up direct royal government in Brazil, establishing a capital in Bahia on the northeastern coast. Starting in the last decades of the 16th century, the Brazilian sugar industry started to grow. In the 17th century, Brazil was the largest sugar producer for the ever-growing European market. As the industry prospered, it attracted more Portuguese immigrants and brought in more African slave workers. Both movements resulted in the declining role of the indigenous population in Brazil. By the third decade of the 17th century, owing to death and flight to the interior areas, very few Indians had left in the coastal sugar production region. Along with the development of the sugar industry, the northeastern cities were beginning to look more like their Spanish-American counterparts. But there are also differences. The northeastern Brazilian cities were built on export of sugar, not mining. They had an Afro-European population base rather than Indo-European population. They were oriented to the sea rather than to the indigenous hinterland. The ethnic hierarchy system was more bipolar because it only had European and African, while the number of Indians were too small to count. In the late 17th century, a major gold deposit was discovered in Minas Gerais, which is a district close to Rio de Janeiro. The mining of gold shifted the focus of development to the southern coastal region. By 1763, Rio had become the capital of Brazil. This is the end of this lecture. Thanks for watching.